President Harris in one of her first major interviews of the cycle on this very topic. Steph will join us with a preview of that interview in just a minute. But first, one of the vice president's most powerful and I would say effective messengers on the issue of the economy, billionaire businessman Mark Cuban, who joined us during the last hour. Watch what he said about Vice President Harris's performance since she took over at the top of the Democratic ticket.
I look at the Harris campaign as a company and Kamala as the CEO, right? She's had, what, 45 days, 60 days to build an entire organization. And you look at the results. She went from negative favorability ratings. She went from recognition being relatively low. She went from being way behind in every single poll you looked at. And now look where she's at. Worst case, she's tied. And in many cases, she's ahead. When you're able to turn around a battleship like a presidential campaign and go from being way behind to tied or ahead, you're doing a lot right. And on the flip side, if you had what seemed like an insurmountable lead, and now you've given up that entire lead to another CEO, you're getting fired. Right? So I think that's the beautiful part of looking at what she's doing. She's run her campaign like a CEO. She's had success. And when I go to talk to business people, that's what I tell them. She's actually running her organization like a CEO. And that's the evidence that you need to know that she'll be a great leader, that she understands business, that she understands organizations, and she'll be a friend and partner to business across the board.
Ringing endorsement there. Joining our conversation, political columnist, host of the podcast In Politic for Puck, Msnbc national affairs analyst John Heilman is at the table for the hour, plus host of the Independent Americans podcast, founder and CEO of Independent Veterans of America, Paul Rykoff, also here for the hour. Joining us is writer and editor for Protect Democracy, Amanda Carpenter. Amanda, I start with you. We were sort of chewing in the last hour of all the ways that this speech sort of speaks to important parts of the electorate. But at a bigger sort of view of this is clearly a candidate in a campaign that sees itself very much on offense.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, what is just continually striking to me, starting, with the unveiling of this campaign when she claimed the nomination, is something that I think Cuban was pointing out, is that she is running this as an organization, and she is always signaling in ways that create the tent bigger than I think traditional liberal Democrats have in the past. I mean, the one part that really jumped out of the speech, I kept reading it, she's promising a stable environment with consistent and transparent rules of the road and promises to cut needless bureaucracy and unnecessary red tape. I mean, that code's so hard, Republican. It just is baffling to me that, this is the contrast to the Republican nominee in 2024, embracing these common sense arguments that we need a stable environment so that business can thrive, because the alternative is a lot of chaos and instability. I mean, it's such a clear-cut dynamic, which is so interesting in a way that, she doesn't have to do a lot of legwork here to appeal to those voters who are outside the traditional Democratic tent.
It's so interesting that Amanda picked up on that. I mean, I picked up on her just sort of pinprick attacks on his record. I mean, here she is calling him out on manufacturing.
Donald Trump, well, he makes big promises on manufacturing. Just yesterday, he went out and promised to bring back manufacturing jobs. And if that sounds familiar, it should. In 2016, he went out and made that very same promise about the Carrier plant in Indianapolis. You'll remember, Carrier then offshored hundreds of jobs to Mexico under his watch. And it wasn't just there. On Trump's watch, offshoring went up and manufacturing jobs went down across our country and across our economy. All told, almost 200,000 manufacturing jobs were lost during his presidency, starting before the pandemic hit, making Trump one of the biggest losers ever on manufacturing.
I can hear him typing somewhere over in the internet, in the darkest corners of Truth Social. She called him the biggest loser.
Yeah, well, I believe it's actually just true in the sense that we were just talking about the fact that at some point that he lost $1 billion. That one tax return, he lost $1 billion, biggest individual tax loss like ever claimed by a single person in American history. So a loser on a number of different levels, including in 2020. When she became the de facto nominee, and replaced Joe Biden, there was a discussion because it was very clear that Biden had only this one path to 270 electoral votes, and it was through these blue wall states. And people talked about how the map could be expanded, and it has been expanded. But what's been interesting, and some of the reason that people focused on that was they worried that maybe she wouldn't be as successful in Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin as Joe Biden had been back in 2020, because these are these older, whiter states, et cetera. And something kind of really interesting has happened along the way, and this is not as much of a non sequitur as it seems because it comes back to this economic message, is that she's gotten stronger in Michigan, and increasingly we've seen some really good polls from her in Pennsylvania. She's looking strong. Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, she continues to be really strong in those places, and in fact is weaker, relatively speaking, in Arizona, Nevada, and Georgia. And I think people are scratching their heads over why this is, and I think that a lot of people in the campaign and other places view that as a reflection of the fact that the manufacturing economy in the Midwest has benefited from Joe Biden's policies in a very direct way. Then there have been there's lots of things to say about the perceptions of the economy in the country. But in that region, the manufacturing base has really benefited from Biden, from chips and from other things. And so is a place where she can piggyback on Biden's record, and as she also kind of hits Trump on the failures that he had, Mr. Manufacturing, Mr. Builder guy. It's really worked to her advantage, and it's the interesting challenge now for her is to continue to take that economic message and use it. The message she's putting out, and then trying to deal with some of these issues around immigration that are going to be a problem in places like Arizona, which is where she's weakest right now, and in Nevada. But it really has been fascinating to see that the blue wall continues to be solid, as solid as anything is in this very close environment for her.
What's interesting talking to Mark Cuban about her as a steward of our country's economy is the starkness of how he sees the choice. And he's not viewed, I don't think by voters or anyone in politics as particularly partisan. But the starkness of the choice he lays out, basically, radical, unstable, nothing but a salesman, and her, moderate, pragmatic. And he loved this line about America being the greatest incubator.
I think Mark Cuban's right. She's surging. She's got upside. His support is kind of calcified. And ultimately, it's a fight over many independent Americans who tend to be uneducated or non-college educated white guys in places like Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, right? And for me, I think the key to her getting to them are two T's. One is taxes. Say you're going to reduce taxes. That's not what they normally hear from Democrats. It's not what they expect from the Democratic brand. So banging on that is very effective. And then the second T is toughness. That's really what she's saying. She said, I can fight. I will fight for you. I can fight more effectively for him. And that's about the aura of her. And you complement that with a dose of maybe another T, Tim Walz, who also looks like them, sounds like them, and can kind of get to where they want to get, especially with men under 50, and do things like this weekend he's going to the Minnesota-Michigan football game. Right now you're going into Trump territory. You're going after Dana White voters and UFC voters. And those are the people that are going to be critical. And it might be just a few thousand of them in Michigan and in Pennsylvania that are going to tip the tide. And I think she's making headway with them. And Mark Cuban is a very effective, trusted, famous, and independent voice that I think is going to be a very effective surrogate for her, too.
On that toughness, I thought one of the toughest parts of the speech was when she brought up China. And she said Trump got played by China. And then she went on and said he sold chips that they used in their military. I will never sell out America, she said.
Yeah, she's saying you can trust me more than you can trust him. And you may not trust either of us, but you can trust me more. And look at his record. I'm going to bang on it. I'm going to fight for you. I think this idea that Kamala will fight for you is a winning message. And when she's got, again, surrogates like Tim Walz and Mark Cuban and others, that's very effective. And people see her fighting for Ukraine. They see her fighting for the working class. This idea of her as a fighter and her origin story, her superhero origin story as a fighter, I think is something that is a winning message for them and something that many voters in these low information voters don't know. They still have a chance to introduce her and introduce her superhero origin story, and that as a fighter is going to be a winning message.
Understand what that would mean, because Putin's agenda is not just about Ukraine. understand why the European allies and our NATO allies are so thankful that you are no longer president, and that we understand the importance of the greatest military alliance the world has ever known, which is NATO, and what we have done to preserve the ability of Zelensky and the Ukrainians to fight for their independence. Otherwise, Putin would be sitting in Kyiv with his eyes on the rest of Europe, starting with Poland. And why don't you tell the 800,000 Polish Americans right here in Pennsylvania how quickly you would give up for the sake of favor and what you think is a friendship with what is known to be a dictator who would eat you for lunch.
We're back with John, Paul, and Amanda. Trump seems to be serving himself up with his favorite condiment, ketchup.
We talked about it earlier.
Ew. I mean, he does. Like, he's going to eat him for lunch. Trump's like, take me, I'm yours.
Ew, still ew. It's these images in my head are
you're not wrong. And I think it comes back to what we talked about earlier, toughness. She's going for it because she's got the high ground, maybe on this issue more than anything else. I don't know if anything divides Trump and Harris more than Ukraine. You're right. It's a capitulation. What he's doing and what Vance and all these folks are doing is treasonous. It's undermining our national security. It's undermining the global order. It's got our enemies celebrating. It's in contrast with American values. And it's unstable. I think that's the through line between this and the economy that she can hammer on. He is batshit crazy, and I am stable. You may not love me, but you know what I'm going to do. And whether you're a business leader or a NATO ally, you can trust me more than you can trust him. And I think that is her most compelling argument, especially with independent voters, especially with national security voters, disaffected Republicans, the people that she's got to make feel okay with her as commander in chief. That's the differentiator right there, and she needs to hammer it.